What's going on, knuckleheads? Hope you guys can hear me good. This is another episode of Fight Life Tips and Advice. I'm out here at the park, man, because this whole pandemic situation is getting crazy. I wanted to get out the house and be at the park, you know. But let's get to it. Why did Gary Russell Jr. diss Terence Crawford? Why did Gary Russell Jr. diss Terence Crawford? They say that no publicity is bad publicity, right? All publicity is good publicity, but I think in some situations you got to disagree with that. And I think this is one of those situations where I got to disagree with that. First and foremost, what's the reason for this call out, right? What is the reason for Gary Russell Jr. picking Terence Crawford, of all people, to do this to? And for me, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because first and foremost, what we have to understand is Gary Russell Jr. is a super featherweight champion, right? He's not just a super featherweight, he's a super featherweight champion. Now, I say that because Terence Crawford is not just a welterweight, he's a welterweight champion, right? So, when you do something like this, you have to have good reasoning. It has to make sense. It has to make sense. Especially as a champion, you should never minimize or underestimate your own importance. And I think that's what Gary Russell Jr. is doing here by calling out a guy that's 3 weight divisions above him, and B, he's doing so as a champion to another champion. It just seems like, to me, a huge kind of lack of respect, whether the story is true or not, that Gary Russell punched Terence Crawford in the face back when they were 18 years old or whatever. It just seems like a huge lack of respect, because you're never going to fight the guy. So, this is never going to be settled inside of a boxing ring. I would imagine that 2 boxers making the amount of money that Terence Crawford and Gary Russell are making are not going to be interested in settling this in the street, which would be a really bad idea for both of their careers. A really bad idea. And if I'm Gary Russell Jr., man, I kind of wrap this up. But instead he's running with it. He's got a lot of goofy journalists and stuff that are helping him run with it. And really, again, there has to be a method to the madness, right? There has to be a reason underlying this, right? Right now, it just seems like anger. Right now, it just seems like he's upset. And that's not a good reason, man, because, if you can never turn it into a big fight in the long run, if you could never turn it into something that's monetarily beneficial to you, then why would you do this? If anything, this negative sort of publicity, or this publicity, is probably going to be seen as negative, because Terence Crawford's got so many more fans than Gary Russell Jr. You just created a lot of disdain among boxing fans that support Terence Crawford if you're Gary Russell Jr. And then on top of it, you can't really do the Floyd Mayweather thing, right? Because you're not, let's face it, you're not Floyd Mayweather to be able to capitalize on this sort of negativity, to be able to play the heel the way that a Floyd Money Mayweather has done throughout his career. You're Gary Russell Jr. You know what I mean? There are other big names that you could start beef with in and around your own division that you could capitalize off of. And that's why this is part of Fight Life tips and advice, because what's Gary Russell going to do if he gets Terence Crawford into a ring? I mean, let's be honest with each other here. A guy that's 3 divisions up from him, he's just going to absolutely destroy him if they ever fight. If this is Gary Russell Jr.'s, attempt at cashing out, then I understand that. But, to cash out against a guy that's 3 weight divisions up from you, it's probably not the best look. You know what I mean? It's probably not the best look. And again, I mean, what's the positive that comes from Gary Russell Jr. calling out Terence Crawford? I mean, does he get some attention? Because that's the only thing I can see from it is attention, a bit of an attention grab. And even then, Terence Crawford kind of wins this fight, right? Because Terence Crawford has already addressed the matter and said, well, he's just looking for attention. And when you're looking for attention, right? At least in my book, when you're looking for attention, you're starving for attention, it means you don't feel like you're getting it, and it's a huge sign of weakness. It's a huge sign of weakness, and it makes you look weak. It makes you look weak to fight fans. It makes you look weak to everybody, and it's not something that you should do. Again, this is on Fight Life tips and advice, because this is a move that I wouldn't recommend unless it was somebody in the same weight division. I mean, if Gary Russell Jr. did this to Lomachenko, say that he punched him in the face or whatever, that would even make more sense than this, even though Lomachenko's a bigger guy. But you know what I mean. I mean, aim for the guys that you have a potential of fighting. Don't aim for the guy that it would be looked at as a complete bully if you guys ever fought each other on the street or in the ring. And certainly do not, whatever you do, settle this kind of situation outside the ring, because it's just absolutely ridiculous if you do something like that, because you got everything to lose and nothing to gain. So yeah, I think you guys can learn from that. I think we could all learn from that. There's no money to be made doing this, and it's just it's bad publicity all the way around. Let me know what you guys think. Like, comment, share, subscribe below if you haven't already. Get your Fighters Rep gear in the link below on the Fighters Rep. I'm out.